Hopefully you guys can hear me now. I'm realizing that I guess everything I was saying there for a while was not working. Hopefully everybody can hear me. One second, I just want to make sure this is working. One second, everybody. Apologies. Just want to make sure my audio is working. I guess it was something was going wrong with it here. Okay, cool. Looks like we are good. Okay, so apologies for that. I didn't realize my audio wasn't working. I don't know what the heck happened with my OBS studio here, but I'll just really quickly recap what I was saying, and then we'll dive back into what I was actually showing here in the demo. So just before we get into all this, that last first 5 minutes, I was just kind of explaining how vlookup was one of the very first formulas that I learned working at Microsoft. One of the most important kind of aha moments for me with spreadsheets. And I was talking about how spreadsheets are just a wonderfully flexible tool, and I've had a lot of experience this week working on reports and things like that, and how important this tool has been for me to be able to do that, right? Spreadsheets are really unique in that sense. They allow us to do so many things that you can't do with other types of software, right? There's a lot of fancy software out there that you can use for analytics, but you are restricted by what it's able to do, what it's been programmed to do. Whereas spreadsheets open up the world to you and let you do what you need to do, but you got to know how to do it, right? Which is why, obviously, you're here looking at this, watching this, learning what we're talking about. And hopefully, now that we actually have some audio, I'm going to jump in and make sure you can learn how to use these lookup formulas properly. So what I was talking about early on is we've got some test data in here. So I'll go back just real quick because I did have that technical difficulty. So let's go back real quick. So we've got our test data in here. This is just some general test data. We've got some names, some age, some cities, and some occupations. You'll see here in a second, we're going to do our lookups against this table. I've started with vlookup because vlookup I think is the most common one you'll see used and was one of the ones I used the most when I was at Microsoft. This is certainly something that it can be super useful when you are trying to search through a large set of data. So I'm going to talk about vlookup first, then we're going to talk about hlookup and xlookup. I'm going to be using ChatGPT 2 as we go through this to show you how you can use AI to create these formulas for you. So we'll go through kind of how they work, and so you understand what they do and what is behind them. And then we're going to use ChatGPT, and I'm going to prompt it to create these formulas for us so that you can get an idea of how to use that type of tool to make this process even easier for you. But I don't want to skip steps because I do want you to understand the basics of how these formulas are working so you can understand how to prompt ChatGPT in the right way to ask the questions that you're going to need to get those type of formulas. Because while ChatGPT is a great tool, you do still need to understand the basics of what you're trying to do and how data works to be able to actually get it to give you the results you're looking for. So with that said, condensed, let's dive back in here. So I am going to start with the vlookup formula. So we're going to grab this, and I'm going to open up this so you can just kind of see how Google talks about vlookup. One of the things I was talking about just a minute ago, and we'll talk about in a second, is there is a slight difference between this and what Excel does, which I'll talk about here in just a minute. But most of this is similar across both programs. So whether you use Google Sheets or Excel, no big deal. You can certainly make it work. But I'll talk about this one slight difference here in a second. But with the vlookup, what you're essentially doing is the V stands for vertical. So you're doing a vertical lookup, which just means you're looking up along a column, right? So a vertical section of your spreadsheet, and then you're returning a value depending on where that value that you're specifying to look up shows up in your original table. If that doesn't make sense, you'll see as I'm kind of going through this here. The caveat that you need to know with this is, and if you're familiar with software development, this will make sense, but you need to have a unique identifier to do a vlookup against. So if the column that you're doing the vlookup against, which is almost always going to be the column A, so the very first column in your table, if it has multiple additions of that set of data, right? So in this example, if this name Alice here was repeated twice in our A column, you wouldn't be able to look it up because then the formula will not know which one to pivot against. Which one of those two values is it actually grabbing the follow-up calculation it's from, right? So you need to have a unique identifier in your table to be able to do one of these type of lookups. And this is the same for all of the lookups, but it's just one of those things that if you aren't familiar with that specific requirement, it can oftentimes trip you up. And that's one of the things that tripped me up early on when I was working with lookup formulas. You would put it in there and then all of a sudden it would shoot back, an NA, right? It'd say it doesn't have the value I'm looking for. I'm like, it does clearly. Like you look at it, start banging your head against the wall trying to figure out why it's not working properly, and then you realize, just like with a database with software, that's why I reference software. You have to have a unique identifier for things to match up, right? Because if it doesn't know which one's which one's paired together, then it's not going to be able to match those up and get you the data. So just keep that in mind. So the first thing you're going to have is this search key, which is that unique identifier we've just been talking about. And in this case, I'm going to use this name Alice here as our first in our vlookup. You're going to put a comma at the end of it there, and that's just saying that I want to search for that value, the value being Alice, and then I have to tell it where I want to search. And this is where there's a little bit of a difference between Google Sheets and Excel. In Excel, you typically will want to format your data, your table, as a table. So there is an ability inside of Excel, and here I'll open up an Excel window so we can go through this and I can show you. But in Excel, if you're in Excel, you'll be able to actually format your data. Let's see I forget where it is. I think it's in. Actually, it might even be at home. Yeah, here it is. Format as table, right? So you want to format your data as a table. When you do that, you'll actually be able to. I don't have any data. You'll actually be able to name your table, and then that name will be what you reference in your VLOOKUP formula. So it's just a slight difference with what you're doing inside of Excel, but in Google Sheets, you actually just have to select the range. Where is the data, right? So in this situation, I'm going back to this sheet, and you'll notice if you're not super familiar with Google Sheets, if you do have an open formula you're working on and you click to a different tab inside of your spreadsheet or a different sheet inside of your spreadsheet, you'll continue your formula and you can continue to build on it from there. And so I'm going to grab all of this as my range, right? Because that's where I want it to be looking. And then the index is how far over do I want it to go. So for example, if in this case I've got, and it's hard to see because it's back there behind, but I've got 3 other columns, right? So I've got ages, cities, and I've got occupations. If I want this to search for Alice and return her age, I would put in a 2 because it's the second column over from the left. If I want to return the city, it would be a 3, and if I want to return the occupation, it would be a 4, right? So let's just do 2 for her age. And then this last piece is the is sorted. So, whether the column to be searched, the first column, is sorted. And usually I just put in true here, if I can actually spell true correctly. And, sometimes you can just leave it out if you want. You just do that, right? And so you'll see here, if I take that out and I run that, right, we'll just double check, make sure this is why I want to have a small set of data in this example, because it makes it easier for us to just do a sanity check. You'll see her age here is 28, and you'll see this is looking up and finding her age. Now, one of the nice things about this, especially with large sets of data, is if you're trying to do this and trying to pull in and create like another table from your data, now I can just do this, right, and it will automatically pull in all of the ranges for these individuals. And you'll see one of the things Google Sheets did here for me as well is it actually locked in my range for me by putting those $signs in there, which means that as I pull this down, it's not changing the date range, because if it doesn't lock those in, which is another thing to keep in mind, it would have then made this like A2 through D12 as I went down, right? It would just increment that range, but obviously this range of data is not changing as I go, right? So nice of Google Sheets to realize what I was trying to do, clean it up for me, and now I have all the ages, and I can just put age right here if I wanted, right? Put it as just by itself, and now you have the ages in this table, right? So pretty easy way, VLOOKUP, right? Vertical lookup. And HLOOKUP, which we'll get to in a second, it's going to be very similar, just horizontal instead of vertical, which is why these lookup formulas are all pretty nice to use. But we'll go back over to ChatGPT here, and I'm going to show you how you can use ChatGPT to actually create a lookup formula like this for yourself. So let's get all of our data, and again, this is why having a small set of data is helpful, but just as an example, I'm going to give ChatGPT my data. Right, so it seems cool, it's got the data, right? And so now I'm going to ask it to create a VLOOKUP formula. So I'm going to say, create a VLOOKUP formula using the name as the unique identifier to get the value in the age column for each person. That should work. And you'll see, right, so it's doing the same thing kind of we just did there, right? So it's got the vlookup, and it's putting the, obviously it's putting a placeholder in there, which is name you're looking for, which in our case we put that name that we were looking for. You've got the range, right, A2 to D11, and in our case it's A1, just because we actually grabbed the headers, which you don't have to, but that changes the range there a little bit, 2, because it's in column 2, right, column 2, and it used false, which you can just leave that out like I said. But there you go. So similar, easy way to create this formula if you didn't want to use or didn't want to type it in yourself, right? So you just explain what you're looking for. You say, I'm looking for a VLOOKUP formula. I'm using the name as the unique identifier, which is important to tell ChatGPT which one's the unique identifier, and I want to get the value in the age column for each person. So for each individual, and it's going to give me that, and then I can run that. You can just copy this by itself over here into this sheet. Now, of course, we're going to need to change this out because ChatGPT didn't realize where that existed, right? So, and the reason we have an actual reference for this, right, instead of putting in, like, you could also just, if you wanted, you could totally type in just Alice in here, right? And it is case sensitive, so just keep that in mind. If you ever are including text like that, they are case sensitive. But if you wanted, you can just, you just want to reference the reference cell. And the reason we do that is because of what I did earlier when I was able to pull it all down and get it to all copy and use the same formula. That's why you want to have that reference in place, because if you have the reference, it's easier for you to use it over and over again, right? Whereas if you have the exact value typed in, it becomes trickier to do. So just something to keep in mind. I'm going to delete that. And we're going to move over to hlookup, where I have the same thing, but the difference with hlookup here, and I may have to step away here for just a second, but the difference for the hlookup is going to be that you have a horizontal lookup instead of a vertical lookup. So instead, what this is doing is with a vertical, for example, I'm going to delete this so it doesn't give me an error, you're looking this way across, right? If you're a vertical, or so that's the vertical. If you're doing horizontal, you're looking this way, right? So just a difference in how it is looking through the formula. So we'll go in here, we're going to type in our hlookup, right? We'll open this up so we can take a look at it. Again, you're going to have a search key, right? In this case would be, maybe name. Maybe we'll do that, right, as our name. So we're looking probably across here, and we're going to do a range, which that will be the same set of data here that we did before. And then the index, let's just say we want to go with 2, and then we go for that, right? And so what it's doing is it's looking up this range, right? It found the name, and the second over is the city, and it's grabbing New York because of the way that value is set up. So if we go back over here into ChatGPT, we can do the exact same thing, but just ask it slightly different. So we'll change this request and say, create a hlookup formula using the name as the identifier, right? And it's going to do the same thing. Yeah, and see, it's saying hlookup not appropriate because that's obviously not what we're trying to do based off of this. So let's restructure the way we're asking this. I'm going to change this up a little bit. We're going to submit that. And there you go. So it's going to pull that in, right? So Bob, and then give it the range, and then for the city for Charlie, you would use this, right? So that's assuming that you have names all up and down, right? So if we go back to our test data, so Alice is right there, and we could do the same thing for the rest of them. Now it's changing this over to an index and a match because it wants to make this a little easier for us to do, but you can do a very similar thing with the hlookup formula, right? So if we drag this down, you'll see here we need to lock this in. It's pulling in 28, so I think it looks like it's basing it off of Alice consistently. Let's see if yeah, okay. So I'll delete those, but hlookup, as you can see, is not usually as useful to use as a vlookup. Vlookup tends to be the more useful of the two, at least in my experience. But you can use hlookup if you have something horizontally you want to look up like that. And then let's move on to the xlookup formula. So xlookup, I'm going to pull this open. And I'm sorry I'm speeding through this a little bit, but I just want to make sure we don't run over too much time. But this is what's considered a cross lookup, right? So it's going to give you a little bit more flexibility for how you actually want to look up the data. So for example, you could have a range and some results, and you're going to be able to get some search keys that you want to look for. So this one, I highly recommend you use something like ChatGPT to do XLOOKUPs, because XLOOKUPs do become a lot more complex, especially when you have a large set of data, right? So you still have your search key, you have the range you want to look it up, and the result you're looking for, the result range, so where you want to drop the value that you get as the result. But then you're going to tell it what you're looking for, and then what the match is and all that. This is why over here we're getting an index and a match, because basically what a XLOOKUP, I keep misspeaking on that because I'm mostly used to using vlookups. An XLOOKUP is kind of a combo of these two formulas, just a different way of doing it, in a way that makes it just a little bit more seamless if you want to. So let's say we want to just return the value of the range for the name field, right? So we're going to tell ChatGPT, create an XLOOKUP formula that returns the values from the name column. Right, so we could do like this, we could do like this. So we can grab this to start with as an example, right? So it returns the values from the name column, and you can use the following formula, right? So the value we're looking for, right? And then, it could be like Alice, it could be whatever we're looking for. And then we want to tell it where to look, right? So those two ranges there. And then if it doesn't find it, we want it to say not found, right? So let's go back here and let's do that in here. I'm going to put that in the value field. We're going to do this. Sorry, I got a dog behind me that's got a cone on her, so I got to make sure she's doing okay. We're going to do this. I'll replace this with the same deal, right? Oh, it's going to become an NA. Sometimes you get some weird stuff going on like that if you be doing this at once. So let's do this, and then I'm gonna press. Still gonna get NA because I haven't put any data in here yet, but we're gonna put this in here. I'm gonna grab Alice as the result. Must be a single row or a single column. So we got to change how we're doing this. So single row, single column. So we need to change this to be this. Oh, it's not letting me do it. Real quick, 1 second. Actually, I think what we can do. Sorry, sometimes you get all sidetracked with how you do this if you accidentally click in the wrong spot. I'm sure others of you have seen this when you're doing this inside of a lookup formula. And troubleshooting these things is always really important to know how to do. So let's troubleshoot this one together. So let's leave that the way it was. Saying vlookup range must be a single row or a single column. So the range that we're looking up, which is this right here, must be a single row. So let's grab this and let's go back over here. Let's grab that. So that should fix that piece. Our different size. Yep, so I think we got to do the same thing here. And there you go. So it's returning Alice because we do have Alice in that. You could change the way this returns based off of what you want to. So if it's missing, it returns that. If it's matched, you might want to return something else, right? So let's just put in here. God, I can't spell true for the life of me. Yeah, of course that's yeah, it needs to be a numerical value. That's what I thought. Okay, so let's do 1. Right. So I thought that was supposed to search mode. Oh, I guess that's not what that does. That's optional. So that's actually the search key. So we can take that out. My bad. That's a slight difference between Excel and Google Sheets there that I'm getting tripped up on. But anyway, you can see what it's doing is it's looking for this value. It's looking in that row, and if it finds it, it's showing up, and if not, it's not. So for example, just to show you what this looks like if we do this improperly, or if we do this with something where it's not a name, let's just put my name in here, right? And now it's going to say not found because that name is not found in this set of data. And you could do the same thing for any of the other rows inside of the table, right? So you got age, city, occupation, whatever it is, you could use XLOOKUP to look up that value and see if it exists. So this could be super useful when you're creating a report and you're trying to understand whether like a customer, for example, exists inside of a shipping report, or, you know, those are some of the, like, you know, whether a customer has purchased from you already and exists inside of your sales data, but maybe they exist inside of your CRM, right? If none of that made any sense to you, just ways you can start to look at this reporting. And so now that we've kind of gone through what these 3 formulas are, let's talk about some use cases and how you can actually make use of these formulas in reporting. So the vlookup, which is the one I use the most, I find really useful for creating new sets of data from existing sets of data, or combining two sets of data together so you can get a single set from two different sources, right? So in this case, obviously we have all of our data already in this test data table, but let's just say I had two sets of data. I had one set that had a bunch of names and a bunch of ages and maybe some other details about these people. And then I had a different table that had all of these names, but it had the cities and the occupations and some other things about those individuals. And I wanted to merge the two together to get a single table that has all of this information in one spot. I could do that with the vlookup formulas by taking a list, right? So I could grab all of these individuals, and we can do this together just as an example right now, right? And then I would go and do vlookups, but I would do vlookups off of different sets of data, right? So if I had two different tables, I would use two different sets of data when I'm doing my reference here, right? So if we go over here and I put this in, right? This one uses test data, but let's just say I had a second sheet called test data 2. I could create a different version of this, right? And you'll see why it said NA in a second. I'll show you just 1 second on that one. But I could then have this reference like test data 2, for example, and that has different data in it. So I'm merging those two tables together, which of course with a small set of data, you just copy paste, not a big deal, right? But with a large set of data, it can be really easy to use something like this instead of copying and pasting, especially if not all the values in one table exist in another table, right? So maybe we have 10 names in one and 12 names in the other table, and both tables don't have the same names, but they do have some of the same names, right? So some are similar, some are not. You could pull in the data that does exist, and then you pull in the data that doesn't. And just to add to that, if you want to kind of take it to another level, you can also use an error formula where you can actually say if the lookup returns an error because it doesn't exist in the other table, to just return like a 0 value or something else to placehold it instead of an NA. That's just makes the data a little bit cleaner, but that's more of a pro tip. You don't need to do that. Certainly just something that can be helpful in certain situations. I just really quickly want to address why this is coming back as an NA, and probably, as we've been going through this, you probably know why it is returning an NA right now, and that reason is that this cell, because it was a reference to a cell, when we moved it over, that of course moved the range that it is referencing, right? So that one was locked in. Our data here was locked in because we had the dollar signs put in place, but this one wasn't. So when we moved it over, it's now trying to look up 23 in this column, which doesn't exist, right? Because it's in this column, and that's to our point earlier we just talked about, right? You can't have a VLOOKUP when you don't have your data in your A column. It's just the way the formula works. It looks for that column, that very first column, and tries to reference whatever value you're providing, right? In this case, I provided the value of 28. 28 doesn't exist in this column, so of course it comes back with an NA, right? But if we pop this over and make this A2, right, it's going to return 28 again. But of course, then in that case, maybe I want to make it 3. And let's lock this in just to make this a little easier, so you can see how you would use this to create a whole table. Of course, you want to put it on both there. So actually, in this case, we probably want to do it on just the A. You'll see why here in a second. But if we pull this over, right, and then we change this to a 4, now you can see the autofill, and I won't do that. But the reason we did that is because we want that 2 to potentially move now when we go in here and we actually drag this down, right? So I drag this down, you'll see it's working for each column, right? Because now it's actually changing that row value, but it's not changing the column value. So it's still referencing the right column, but it's changing the rows as I go. So that's a nice little thing you can do to be able to, if this was a large set of data, right, I could just drag this down and pull all that in, and then I'd create maybe a second one that references a different table, and I'm combining that data set to give me a better way of looking at all of this. So that is going to wrap up our lookup lesson. Again, I highly recommend you use ChatGPT when you can. ChatGPT will help you, like you saw in my situation, right? Sometimes it's going to tell you a different way to do it. I've oftentimes seen when I'm asking for a VLOOKUP, it may change it to an if statement instead, or an if statement plus a match statement. I had one specific example recently where I was trying to look up whether an email existed inside of a data set, and instead of doing a VLOOKUP, which is what I was trying to do, ChatGPT pushed me to use an if statement with a match statement as well, which worked really well. So highly recommend you use tools like this that you have access to when you're building out these formulas. It certainly will make things a lot easier, but it's good to know the basics, right, of how lookup formulas work and how you can use them in your everyday reporting. So I'm going to jump over here, see if we can get any questions. Doesn't look like there's any questions about any of it, but if there is and anybody has questions, drop them in the comments after this live. I'll be happy to jump in there and help you answer anything that you might have that you ran into. And apologies again for running into some of those technical difficulties when we got started. That I don't know why my mic was not connected. It's been sitting here in front of me the whole time, but I apologize for that early part and not being able to, for everybody not being able to hear me. Now that we're wrapped up, if you want, we are going to have an exclusive offer in the description below after this video is wrapped up. You'll be able to get access to all of our courses so you can learn more about this kind of stuff for only $1 for your first month. So go ahead and grab access to that if you want to learn more about how to use spreadsheets and how to grow your knowledge. Like I mentioned when I was muted, which means I guess I didn't really mention it, right? This type of tool is something that has been absolutely essential for me. Like I said, I've been doing a lot of reporting with it this week, been able to discover some wonderful insights that are going to have profound impacts on the projects I'm working on. So learning how to make use of this kind of a tool is something I cannot recommend enough. You will be able to do all sorts of different things, and you'll have that flexibility to really analyze data in a way that, again, those off-the-shelf tools just can't really do it unless you have the need to do it the way they have set it up, right? A lot of those tools are really great. I mean, even like Power BI, which is another Microsoft tool, right, has wonderful ability to do some of these things, but it is limited in what it can do. Spreadsheets are so flexible, and that's one of the things I love so much about them. It's a skill that will never go out of use. Oftentimes when you're stuck with something and you can't get one of those fancy tools to work, it's always nice to go back to spreadsheets and know that you can solve it with a spreadsheet. It may not be as pretty, may not be as efficient, but you can get the answer you need. And ultimately, that's what you're after, right? We're all in situations where we're trying to solve a problem for a business or a project or something that we're working on in our personal lives, and we want to get to that answer. And whether it takes an extra half hour, hopefully if you're using ChatGPT to do some of the stuff, maybe it doesn't, right? But, maybe it takes a little longer because you're not using this fancy tool, but you're going to get the answer, and you're going to get an answer you can be confident in, right? And that's the other thing I love about spreadsheets is because you can actually see the data in front of you, it's easy to be pretty confident in what you're saying, right? As long as the data is good, of course, because it all starts with having good, reliable data. But as long as you know the data is good, you can see what's going on. It's not obscured by all this type of fancy software that's doing dashboards and things like that for you. And I'm not poo-pooing those. Those are absolutely things that you might want to use in certain situations, and those tools are awesome for certain things. But I'm just telling you, spreadsheets, learn this first. This is like the skill that will get you that analytics edge that you will want to have. It's going to help you solve better problems, make better decisions, and just be a all-around better, more well-rounded professional. So with that said, I'm going to wrap up. I apologize for going a little over my time that I had allotted us today, but I'm going to use the excuse that I didn't have some for the first 5 minutes, so how to make up those first few minutes. So again, I hope you've enjoyed this live. We'll be on next week talking about something else to help you grow your spreadsheet knowledge. And again, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. We'll answer those after the live, and take advantage of that exclusive deal so that you can learn more about how to maximize your spreadsheet efficiency and make it a big part of your professional lives. Thanks, everybody.